Sophia Mendez moved through Camp Holloway's artillery training grounds like a ghost, silent, focused, and deliberately unremarkable. At 29, she had mastered the art of being overlooked despite standing at an impressive 5'9". Her uniform, always perfectly pressed but a size too large, helped conceal her athletic build. Her amber eyes rarely met anyone else's, and her dark hair remained tucked neatly beneath her cap. The men called her Paperclip behind her back, small, bendable, useful for minor tasks but ultimately replaceable. She wasn't a soldier at all, officially speaking. Just a civilian logistics specialist hired 11 months ago to handle supply, requisitions, maintenance schedules, and administrative work for the 75th Field Artillery Brigade. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Supply reports, equipment maintenance logs, inventory audits. Sophia had processed it all with a quiet efficiency that made people forget she was even there, which was precisely how she preferred it. Every morning at 0530, Sophia arrived at the administrative office before anyone else. She prepared the day's requisition forms, organized maintenance schedules, and made coffee strong enough to strip paint. The base hummed with the disciplined chaos of military training, officers shouting orders, recruits running drills, the rhythmic thunder of artillery practice from the firing range. Sophia worked through it all with methodical precision, a slender figure in standard-issue khakis who seemed to anticipate every logistical need before it arose. The soldiers who bothered to notice her at all saw exactly what they expected to see: a quiet civilian contractor who kept their paperwork in order. Some were polite enough, nodding when they passed her in the corridors. Others treated her like furniture, useful when needed, invisible otherwise. A few, like Lieutenant James Mercer, seemed to take special pleasure in reminding her of her place in the base hierarchy. Paperclips on the move again, Mercer would say whenever Sophia appeared with requisition forms, his voice pitched just loud enough for nearby soldiers to hear. Bet she'd faint dead away if she ever heard an actual howitzer fire. Sophia never responded to the comments. She'd learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when you had bigger secrets to protect. She'd process the forms, update the logs, file the reports, and return to her office where she'd spend lunch breaks alone studying ballistics calculations and artillery manuals. What none of them knew, what none of them could possibly have guessed, was that Sophia Mendez was the daughter of General Ricardo "Thunderbolt" Mendez, one of the most decorated artillery officers in Army history. 3 Distinguished Service Medals, 2 Silver Stars, and the legendary midnight strike that had broken enemy lines during the Gulf War. Military historians still studied his unprecedented coordination of multiple artillery batteries that had achieved what many had considered impossible. Sophia wore her father's wristwatch every day, a simple, weathered Timex that had timed countless fire missions across 3 conflicts. She'd inherited more than just a timepiece when Ricardo died of cancer 4 years ago. She'd inherited 20 years of training, calculations that could place shells within meters of their target from miles away, and a precision that extended far beyond artillery into every aspect of her life. But she'd also inherited his burden, the weight of what those skills could do, the responsibility that came with wielding that kind of destructive power. After Ricardo's funeral, Sophia had left her position as an artillery officer. 8 years of distinguished service, 2 deployments to combat zones, dozens of successful fire missions that had saved Allied lives. All of it felt hollow without him there to guide her. She'd tried civilian work for a while, but corporate America felt too detached, too purposeless. The logistics position at Camp Holloway was perfect. Military environment, support role, no combat expectations. She could serve without commanding, contribute without destruction. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd ended up exactly where she started, surrounded by the thunder of artillery, by soldiers who saw her as nothing more than a paperwork processor. But anonymity had its advantages. Nobody asked probing questions about her background. Nobody expected her to be anything more than competent at basic logistics. Nobody suspected that the quiet woman organizing supply chains could calculate firing solutions in her head faster than most computers. Sophia's modest off-base apartment reflected her carefully constructed ordinary life, military history books, a few photographs of her father in dress uniform, and locked in a trunk she rarely opened, his custom-designed artillery compass and slide rule. She maintained them meticulously since his death, but never used them. That chapter of her life was over. Or so she thought. The first sign that her carefully constructed piece was about to shatter came on a Thursday afternoon during a training exercise for new recruits. Captain Ryan Anderson, an ambitious officer with more confidence than experience, was demonstrating firing calculations for the M777 howitzer to a group of nervous privates. "This is where the magic happens," Anderson was saying, pointing to the targeting computer. "Ballistics, wind speed, temperature, all these factors determine whether your shell lands on the enemy or on friendlies. Get it wrong, and people die." Sophia was passing by with an armful of maintenance logs when she heard Anderson's next words. "So for today's example, we're simulating a hill at 4,300 meters with crosswinds at 14 knots from the southwest. The calculations suggest an elevation of 42.7 degrees and a powder charge of 4. Sophia stopped mid-step, her whole body suddenly alert. The calculation was wrong. Dangerously wrong. With those settings, the shell would fall nearly 300 meters short of the target, potentially into a safety zone. Time seemed to slow as her father's training kicked in automatically. Target distance assessment, wind compensation calculation, powder charge verification. The settings needed significant adjustment. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Sophia was moving before she could stop herself, walking directly toward the group of soldiers. Not running, but moving with purpose, her steps quick and deliberate. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice stronger than anyone present had ever heard it. "Those calculations aren't correct." The tuna training area fell silent. Captain Anderson turned slowly, his expression a mixture of shock and irritation at being interrupted. "Excuse me?" he said, drawing himself up to his full height. "The calculations," Sophia repeated, her voice steady. "With these conditions, you need an elevation of 45.3 degrees and a powder charge of 5. Otherwise, you'll fall short by about 300 meters. Anderson's face flushed red. "Miss Mendez, isn't it? From logistics? I appreciate your concern, but artillery calculations are a bit more complex than supply requisitions." Titters of laughter rippled through the assembled soldiers. Sophia felt her cheeks warm, but she held her ground. "The settings are wrong." "Sir," she insisted quietly, "I'm certain of it." "Certain of it?" Anderson's voice dripped with condescension. "And where exactly did you get your artillery training, Miss Mendez? YouTube?" More laughter, louder now. Sophia could feel her careful anonymity crumbling around her, but safety protocols were more important than her cover. "Sir, please double-check the calculations," she said firmly. Anderson's smile was cold. "Privates, let this be a lesson. Everyone thinks they're an expert these days. Miss Mendez, why don't you return to your paperwork and leave the artillery to the professionals?" Sophia's heart pounded in her chest. Walking away meant letting them fire with incorrect calculations. Staying meant revealing more than she wanted to. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "Sophia, artillery isn't just about hitting targets. It's about protecting your own people first." "Sir," she said, meeting Anderson's eyes directly for perhaps the first time since she'd been hired, Respectfully request that you verify those calculations with fire control before proceeding." Anderson's amusement vanished, replaced by anger at being challenged in front of his trainees. "That's enough, Miss Mendez. This is a military training exercise, not a debate club. Return to your post immediately." Sophia took a deep breath, weighing her options. Just then, Major Collins, the battery commander, approached the group, drawn by the unusual confrontation. "What's the situation here, Captain?" he asked, his experienced eyes taking in the scene. "Nothing, sir," Anderson replied quickly. "Just a civilian contractor overstepping her boundaries. We're conducting standard training calculations." Major Collins looked at Sophia, his expression neutral. "Miss Mendez, you had a concern?" Sophia straightened her posture unconsciously, muscle memory from her officer days taking over. "Sir, the firing solution Captain Anderson provided has an error that would result in a significant undershoot. With the given conditions, it should be 3 degrees elevation with a charge of 5. Collins studied her for a moment, then turned to Anderson. "Let's verify that, Captain." Anderson's protest died on his lips at Collins' expression. He turned to the firing computer and input the parameters again. After a moment, his face paled slightly. "The computer confirms 1 degrees, sir, and recommends charge 5. A heavy silence fell over the group. Major Collins' gaze returned to Sophia, more curious now. "That's extremely precise estimation, Miss Mendez. Most experienced artillery officers would have just known something was wrong, not the exact correction." Sophia dropped her eyes, cursing herself internally. "I have some background in mathematics, sir." "Mathematics," Collins repeated thoughtfully. "I see. Captain Anderson, correct your demonstration and proceed. Miss Mendez, a word in private, please." As they walked away from the training area, Sophia could feel her carefully constructed world beginning to crumble. Collins waited until they were out of earshot before speaking. "Logistics specialists don't typically calculate artillery firing solutions in their heads, Miss Mendez," he said quietly, "especially not with that level of precision." Sophia remained silent, weighing her limited options. "Your personnel file says you were hired directly by Colonel Matthews last year," Collins continued. "Standard background check, but no detailed military history. Just prior service noted." "Yes, sir," Sophia answered, keeping her voice neutral. Collins studied her for a long moment. "You know, you remind me of someone, an officer I served with years ago, Ricardo Mendez. Brilliant artillery mind. Could calculate complex firing solutions faster than our computers." Sophia felt her heart skip a beat at her father's name. "Any relation?" Collins asked, though his tone suggested he already knew the answer. Sophia hesitated, then met his eyes. "He was my father, sir." Collins nodded. Slowly. "I thought so. You have his eyes. And apparently his gift for ballistics." He paused. "Ricardo Thunderbolt Mendez's daughter working as a logistics specialist, hiding from artillery. That's quite a story." "I'm not hiding, sir," Sophia said automatically, though they both knew it was a lie. "Of course not," Collins agreed diplomatically. "Just underemployed. Very underemployed." He sighed. "Look, Miss Mendez, what you did there potentially prevented an accident. That was good work. But it's also raised questions that won't simply disappear." "I understand, sir. Do you want to tell me the real story, or should I piece it together myself?" Sophia considered her options before answering. "After my father died, I needed distance from artillery, from command decisions, from the responsibility. This position offered that distance while still allowing me to serve." Collins nodded. "And Colonel Matthews knew this when he hired you?" "Yes, sir. He served with my father in the Gulf. When I approached him about a position, he understood my situation." "I see." Collins glanced back toward the training area. Your secret's likely out now, at least partially. Captain Anderson won't take kindly to being corrected by a logistics specialist, especially so publicly. I'm aware, sir. I'll handle it. Collins seemed to make a decision. Report to my office tomorrow at 0700. We should discuss your role here more thoroughly. Yes, sir. After Collins left, Sophia stood alone, her hands trembling slightly for the first time since the incident with the firing calculations. She'd been so careful, so thorough in constructing her new identity. Her Army records weren't classified, but she'd legally changed her name after leaving active duty from Sofia Mendez to Sophia Martinez, specifically to create distance from her father's reputation. Colonel Matthews had been the only one who knew, agreeing to list her simply as having prior service in her file. But now, with one momentary lapse of judgment, one instinctive correction that she couldn't stop herself from making, the walls between her past and present were beginning to crack. Captain Anderson would be embarrassed and angry. The soldiers who witnessed the exchange would be curious. Questions would be asked. Rumors would spread. That night, Sophia sat in her apartment staring at her father's artillery compass, removed from its storage trunk for the first time in months. She wasn't planning anything, just reconnecting with the part of herself she'd been trying to suppress. The specialized instrument was exactly as she'd left it, perfectly maintained. Custom modifications that Ricardo had made over years of service. A tool designed for one purpose, calculating the precise path needed to deliver destructive power. Exactly where it was required. Sophia had inherited her father's precision, but she'd also inherited his wisdom. Ricardo had taught her that the most powerful weapon was the one your enemy didn't realize you possessed. For 11 months she'd been the ultimate hidden asset, a master artillery officer disguised as a logistics specialist. But hiding had its costs. The incident with Anderson, his increasing hostility that was sure to follow. The way other soldiers would now look at her with curiosity rather than indifference. It was all building towards something Sophia couldn't control from her position of artificial weakness. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Interesting performance today. Looking forward to learning more about your mathematical background. Sleep tight, Paperclip. Anderson had her personal phone number. He was escalating beyond workplace mockery into something more personal, more threatening. Sophia stared at the message, then at her father's compass, then at the photo on her shelf showing Ricardo in his dress uniform, rows of medals gleaming under the glass. What would you do, Dad? She whispered to the empty apartment. The answer came to her in Ricardo's voice, as clear as if he were sitting beside her. Sometimes, Mia, the best way to end a fight is to show them exactly who they're fighting. Sophia closed the compass case and made her decision. She'd given peace a chance, tried to honor her father's memory through supporting roles rather than leadership. But Anderson had made it clear that peace wasn't an option. He wanted to know who she really was. Maybe it was time to show him. Anderson's campaign against Sophia intensified over the next week. He'd found allies among the junior officers, soldiers who resented civilian contractors in general and competent women in particular. They'd make comments about calculator girls and office heroes, just loud enough for Sophia to hear. They'd question her requisition forms, second-guess her logistics plans, and create an atmosphere of hostility around everything she did. Sophia endured it all with the same quiet professionalism she'd maintained for months, but inside she was making preparations. She began documenting everything: times, dates, witnesses, exact quotes. Her father had taught her that intelligence gathering was as important as ballistic calculations, and Anderson was giving her plenty of ammunition. The harassment took a more serious turn when Sophia arrived at work one morning to find her office ransacked, files scattered, equipment moved, her carefully organized requisition forms strewn across the floor. A note was taped to her computer monitor, maybe stick to paper clips. A friend Sophia photographed everything before cleaning up, adding the images to the file she was building. Anderson had escalated to vandalism, probably thinking he could intimidate her into quitting. He had no idea he was poking a predator who'd been trained by the best. That afternoon, Sergeant Major Ramirez stopped by Sophia's office. Ramirez was old-school Army, a 25-year veteran who'd earned his stripes in combat zones across the world. He was respected throughout the base, and his opinion carried weight with the command staff. "Miss Martinez," Ramirez said, his voice carefully neutral, "I wanted to ask you about something I've been hearing around the battery. Rumors, questions about your background in mathematics. Wanted to give you a chance to address them directly." Sophia looked up from her work, meeting Ramirez's eyes. "What kind of questions, Sergeant Major?" "The kind that suggest maybe you're not who you say you are. Maybe you have knowledge that doesn't align with your position here." Ramirez sat down, his expression serious. "I've been watching you work for months. Your logistics skills are excellent, your efficiency is impressive, and you handle pressure better than most combat veterans I've known. But Captain Anderson has raised some concerns about your personnel file, your hiring process. What specifically is he claiming?" Sophia asked, keeping her voice even. "He's suggesting that your paperwork might be incomplete, that there are gaps in your history that weren't properly investigated during your hiring process." Ramirez leaned forward. "He's also suggesting that Colonel Matthews might have bypassed standard protocols to bring you on board." Sophia felt something cold settle in her stomach. Anderson was going after her job now, trying to create enough doubt to force a deeper background investigation. If they connected Sofia Martinez to Sophia Mendez, her carefully constructed new identity would crumble. "Captain Anderson seems to have a lot of opinions about my qualifications," Sophia said carefully. "He does, and he's been sharing them with anyone who'll listen." Ramirez studied her face. "The thing is, I've been around long enough to recognize certain qualities in people, the way you move, the way you assess situations, the way you stay calm under pressure. You remind me of people I've served with in combat." Sophia's hands went still on her keyboard. Ramirez was fishing, but he was also observant. How much had he noticed? How much had he guessed? "I think," Ramirez continued, "that whatever Anderson thinks he's uncovered, he might not understand the full picture. And I think he might be making a mistake by pushing this issue." "What are you saying, Sergeant Major?" "I'm saying that if you have a story to tell, it might be better to tell it on your own terms, rather than let Anderson control the narrative." Ramirez stood up. "I'm saying that if Anderson is hunting something he doesn't understand, he might find more than he bargained for." After Ramirez left, Sophia sat alone in her office, staring at her father's watch. 1,632 hours. In less than an hour, the afternoon staff meeting would begin, and she'd be back to handling the endless stream of logistics issues that made up her official duties. But underneath the routine, war was being declared. Anderson wanted to know who she really was. Fine, but he was about to learn that some secrets were kept for everyone's protection, not just hers. That evening, Sophia made a phone call to a number she hadn't used in 4 years. It was answered on the third ring. "Colonel Matthews' office." "Sir, this is Sophia," she caught herself. "This is Captain Mendez. Service number 294-7685231. I need to speak with the Colonel about my situation." A pause. "Mendez, it's been a while. How's logistics treating you? I have a situation that might require clarification of my background." Sophia explained about Anderson, about his investigation, about the escalating harassment. Matthews listened without interrupting, occasionally asking for clarification on dates and specifics. "So you're asking me to reveal your true identity?" he asked when she had finished. "I'm asking you to be ready to verify it if it becomes necessary. Someone's digging into my background, and I'd rather control how the information comes out than let them stumble onto it accidentally." Understood. I'll make sure your real file is ready for immediate release on your authorization. Matthews paused. And Mendez? Your father would be proud of how you've handled this so far. But if push comes to shove, don't let them forget who trained you. Sophia hung up the phone and looked at the trunk containing her father's artillery tools. She'd spent 4 years running from who she was, trying to honor Ricardo's memory through support roles instead of leadership. But Anderson had made it clear that running wasn't an option anymore. Time to stop being Paperclip and remind everyone why Ricardo Mendez had been called Thunderbolt. The hunt was about to become a war, and Sophia had been trained by the best artillery officer the Army had ever produced. Anderson had no idea what he'd awakened. The annual artillery qualification came with 2 weeks' notice. All combat and support personnel were required to demonstrate basic proficiency with the M777 howitzer systems. Sophia read the memo twice, understanding immediately that this wasn't routine scheduling. Anderson had engineered this, probably convinced Major Collins that support staff needed evaluation after the incident with the training calculations. Going to be interesting, she heard Anderson tell another officer as she passed in the hallway. See who's been telling the truth about their qualifications. Sophia spent the week preparing, but not in the way Anderson expected. She researched the qualification course, studied the scenarios they'd likely run, and planned her approach carefully. Her father had taught her that every engagement was won or lost in the preparation phase. This wouldn't be a demonstration of her skills, it would be a revelation. The night before the qualification, Sophia sat in her apartment with her father's artillery compass on her kitchen table. She cleaned the instrument with the methodical precision Ricardo had drilled into her, muscle memory taking over as her mind focused on the coming day. She wasn't planning to use the compass. It would stay locked in her trunk, but the ritual connected her to Ricardo's teachings, to the legacy she'd been trying to escape. Precision with purpose, she whispered, repeating one of her father's favorite phrases. Tomorrow would require both. Qualification day dawned clear and cold, with a tricky variable wind that would challenge even experienced artillery officers. Sophia arrived at the range early, before the other support staff, and found Sergeant Major Ramirez supervising the setup of the howitzers. "Morning, Miss Martinez," Ramirez said, not looking up from the firing computer he was inspecting. "Ready for today?" "As ready as I can be," Sophia replied. Ramirez gestured to a weather station being set up nearby. "They've added environmental challenges this year. Variable winds, shifting barometric pressure. Thought you might be interested." Sophia studied the equipment, noting the sophisticated wind gauges and temperature sensors. Those are unusually precise instruments for a basic qualification. Captain Anderson insisted we test under realistic combat conditions. Ramirez met her eyes. Said something about separating the real soldiers from the pretenders. Sophia understood the implication. Anderson had engineered a qualification course designed to be difficult enough that most support staff would struggle. He was setting her up to either fail publicly or reveal her true skills. "Any volunteers for the demonstration round?" Major Collins called out as personnel began to gather. Before anyone could respond, Anderson stepped forward. "I'd be happy to demonstrate the proper procedure, sir," he said, his confidence evident in his posture. "Show everyone how it's done." Collins nodded his approval. "Captain Anderson will demonstrate the qualification course. Pay attention, everyone." Sophia watched from the back of the group as Anderson took command of the howitzer crew. He was competent, she had to admit. His commands were clear, his procedures correct. The crew responded with practiced efficiency, loading the howitzer with a training round and awaiting firing coordinates. Collins handed Anderson a sealed envelope. "These are your target coordinates and environmental conditions. Standard qualification protocol. You have 3 minutes to calculate your firing solution and execute." Anderson opened the envelope, studying the contents before moving to the firing computer. Sophia watched him input data, make calculations, and issue commands to adjust the howitzer's elevation and bearing. His confidence never wavered, even as the wind gauge showed shifting conditions. "Fire mission over," Anderson called out. The fainting howitzer thundered, the recoil rocking the massive weapon as it sent the training round downrange. Through spotting scopes, observers tracked the shell's impact. "Target struck 48 meters from center," announced the range officer. "Qualified but not optimal." Anderson's smile was tight. 48 meters was technically within acceptable limits for qualification, but far from impressive for an officer of his rank. The shifting winds had clearly thrown off his calculations more than he'd anticipated. "Acceptable work, Captain," Collins said neutrally. "Now let's begin with the support staff." One by one, logistics personnel, administrative staff, and other non-combat soldiers attempted the qualification. Most struggled with even basic procedures, much less accurate firing solutions. Sophia watched, calculating her own solutions silently. As each new set of coordinates was revealed, "Martinez," Collins called finally, "you're up." Sophia approached the howitzer, aware of the eyes following her. Anderson stood nearby, arms crossed, a satisfied smirk on his face. He expected her to fail, to demonstrate that her correction of his training calculations had been a fluke. "Same rules," Collins said, handing her an envelope. 3 minutes to calculate and execute. Sophia opened the envelope and reviewed the contents. Target at 3,750 meters. Crosswind at 12 knots, gusting to 17. Barometric pressure dropping. Temperature at 52 degrees Fahrenheit. Challenging conditions deliberately chosen to test the limits of the firing computer's standard algorithms. She stepped to the firing computer, but instead of immediately inputting the data, she looked out across the range, feeling the wind on her face. She checked her father's watch, not for the time, but for the barometric pressure gauge built into its face, a custom feature Ricardo had added years ago. Something in her posture must have changed, because the whispered conversations around her suddenly ceased. The howitzer crew straightened, responding to an authority Sophia wasn't aware she was projecting. She began inputting data into the computer, but then paused, frowning slightly. The computer's suggested firing solution didn't align with her mental calculations. The standard algorithms weren't fully accounting for the gusting wind patterns and dropping pressure. Sophia had a choice. She could accept the computer solution, which would likely result in a marginal qualification similar to Anderson's. Or she could override it with her own calculations, revealing skills no logistics specialist should possess. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. "The difference between a good artillery officer and a great one isn't following procedures, Sophia. It's knowing when the procedures aren't enough." Sophia began manually adjusting the firing solution, overriding the computer's recommendations with precision that came from years of training under Ricardo Mendez. "What are you doing?" Anderson demanded, stepping forward. "The computer has already calculated the optimal solution." "The computer's wrong," Sophia said quietly, continuing her adjustments. "It's not accounting properly for the wind pattern and pressure drop." "That's ridiculous," Anderson scoffed. "You can't possibly." "Captain," Collins interrupted, "let her proceed." Sophia completed her calculations and turned to the howitzer crew. "Adjust elevation to 42.8 degrees. Bearing 057-4, charge 4. The crew looked to Collins, who nodded his authorization. They made the adjustments Sophia had specified, their movements suddenly more precise, responding to the unmistakable command presence she was now allowing herself to project. "Ready to fire," reported the crew chief. Sophia checked her father's watch one last time, feeling a subtle shift in the wind. "Adjust elevation to 43.1 degrees, she ordered, making a final correction. "Fire," she commanded. The howitzer roared, its massive barrel absorbing the recoil as it sent the shell downrange. Sophia didn't need the spotting scope. She knew exactly where the round would land. "Direct hit," announced the stunned range officer. "Zero deviation. Perfect strike. A perfect shot." The kind of precision that came from more than just training. It came from innate talent honed by thousands of hours of practice. The kind of shot that Ricardo "Thunderbolt" Mendez had been famous for. The range fell silent. Collins studied Sophia with new understanding in his eyes. Anderson's face had gone pale, then flushed with anger. "That's impossible," he said, his voice tight. "No one hits a perfect shot in these conditions. The computer must be malfunctioning." "The computer's fine," Ramirez said. "The shot was perfect. I saw it impact." "Then she cheated somehow," Anderson insisted. "No logistics specialist could make that shot. It's not possible." Sophia met his accusation calmly. "You're right, Captain. No logistics specialist could make that shot." She turned to Collins. "Permission to explain, sir." Collins nodded, his expression suggesting he already understood what was coming. Sophia faced the assembled soldiers, standing straighter than she had in 11 months, allowing herself to reclaim the posture and presence of the officer she truly was. "My name is Sophia Mendez," she said, her voice carrying across the now silent. "Range. Former Captain, United States Army Artillery Corps. Graduate of West Point, top of my class in ballistic calculations. And daughter of General Ricardo Mendez." The silence that followed was profound. Sophia could see recognition dawning on faces throughout the group. Ricardo Mendez wasn't just a legendary artillery officer, he was an icon whose techniques were still taught at West Point. "That's a lie," Anderson said, but there was uncertainty in his voice now. "Your file says Martinez. Your records were changed at my request when I left active duty," Sophia interrupted. "Colonel Matthews facilitated my transition to civilian support staff, respecting my wish to serve without the shadow of my father's reputation." Ramirez stepped forward, the M777's maintenance manual in his hands. Opening it to the acknowledgments page, he pointed to a name. "Look familiar?" "Special thanks to Captain S. Mendez for technical contributions to ballistic calculations. That's the manual we've been using for 3 years." Anderson stared at the page, then at Sophia, comprehension and horror dawning on his face. He hadn't just been harassing a civilian contractor. He'd been tormenting one of the most qualified artillery officers in the Army, someone whose work he'd been referencing throughout his career. "This isn't possible," he muttered. "Oh, it's possible," Ramirez said. "I served with Ricardo Mendez in Desert Storm, saw him make shots that shouldn't have been possible. His daughter standing here making a perfect shot under these conditions? That I believe." Collins cleared his throat. "I think we've seen enough for today's qualification. Captain Anderson, secure the range. Miss Mendez, or should I say Captain Mendez, my office, 1500 hours." As Sophia walked away from the howitzer, she could feel the weight of stares following her. The whispers had already begun, the story spreading through the ranks like wildfire. The truth was out now. She was Ricardo "Thunderbolt" Mendez's daughter. Trained by the legend himself, hiding in plain sight as a logistics specialist. For the first time in 11 months, Sophia walked with her natural stride, the confident gait of an officer who knew her capabilities and wasn't afraid to demonstrate them. The charade was over. The question now was what came next. Colonel Matthews was waiting in Collins' office when Sophia arrived that afternoon. Seeing her former commanding officer brought a rush of complicated emotions, gratitude for his help in creating her new identity, apprehension about what her revelation might mean for both of them. "Captain Mendez," Matthews greeted her formally, using her real name and rank. "It seems you've had an eventful day." "Sir," Sophia acknowledged, automatically standing at attention despite her civilian status. "At ease," Matthews said with a Small smile. We're not exactly in a formal military setting here. Collins gestured for her to sit. I've been speaking with Colonel Matthews about your situation. He's filled me in on some of the details I was missing. After General Mendez died, Matthews explained, Sophia requested an honorable discharge and a change of identity. She wanted to continue serving, but needed distance from her father's legacy and the expectations that came with it. A legacy that was crushing you, Collins observed. Sophia nodded. My father cast a long shadow, sir. Every shot I made, every calculation, every command decision was compared to his standard. After he died, I couldn't bear the weight of being Thunderbolt's daughter anymore. So you became Sofia Martinez, logistics specialist, Collins said. Hiding your talents to escape the pressure. Not hiding, sir. Just finding a different way to serve. Matthews leaned forward. What happened today changes things, Sophia. Your cover is blown. The entire base will know who you are by dinner. I understand, sir. The question is, what do you want to do now? Collins asked. You could request a transfer to another base. Try to maintain your civilian role elsewhere. Or, Sophia prompted when he didn't continue. Matthews and Collins exchanged glances. Or you could reclaim your commission, Matthews said. Return to the Artillery Corps as Captain Mendez. Your discharge was honorable. Reactivation is possible with minimal paperwork. Sophia felt a surge of panic at the suggestion. Return to active duty? Resume command responsibilities? Step back into the shadow of her father's reputation? It was exactly what she'd been running from. I don't think I can do that, sir, she said quietly. Can't or won't? Collins asked, his tone neutral but challenging. Before Sophia could answer, there was a knock at the door. A young lieutenant entered, his expression urgent. Sorry to interrupt, sirs, but we've just received priority orders from Central Command. The situation at Forward Operating Base Echo has deteriorated. They're requesting immediate artillery support, but their targeting systems have been compromised. They need a remote firing solution calculated and transmitted within the hour. Collins frowned. FOB Echo is in complex terrain with variable weather conditions. Without their targeting data, calculating an accurate remote solution would be nearly impossible. Not impossible, Matthews said, looking at Sophia. Just extremely difficult. Sophia felt both officers' eyes on her. FOB Echo. American soldiers in danger. A complex artillery problem that few people alive could solve. And two commanding officers who knew exactly what she was capable of. How bad is the situation? She asked the lieutenant. Critical, ma'am. 57 personnel trapped. Enemy forces advancing from multiple directions. Air support is unavailable due to weather conditions. Artillery is their only option, but they need extremely precise fire to avoid hitting their own position. Sophia closed her eyes briefly, seeing the scenario in her mind. Soldiers trapped, counting on support that seemed impossible to provide. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Artillery isn't just about destruction, Mia. Sometimes it's the only thing standing between good people and death. I'll need the latest satellite imagery of the area, she said, opening her eyes. Weather data, terrain mapping, and direct communication with whatever targeting specialists they have left at Echo. Collins and Matthews exchanged surprised glances. Does that mean you're accepting the assignment, Captain Mendez? Collins asked formally. Sophia took a deep breath, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders once more. Not her father's legacy now, but her own choice, her own purpose. Yes, sir, I am. Within 20 minutes, the Tactical Operations Center had been converted into a remote artillery command post. Sophia sat at the central station, surrounded by maps, weather reports, and communication equipment linking her to FOB Echo. Around her, a hastily assembled team of specialists worked to gather the data she needed. Captain Mendez, said the communications officer, I have Major Reynolds from Echo on the secure line. Sophia put on the headset. Major Reynolds, this is Captain Mendez at Camp Holloway. I understand you need a remote firing solution. Captain, we're in a hell of a situation here. Reynolds' voice was strained but professional. Enemy forces have destroyed our targeting systems and are advancing from the northeast and southwest. We have approximately 40 minutes before they reach our position. I need you to give me everything you have, Major, Sophia said, her voice calm and focused. Landmarks, visual references, anything that can help me build a mental map of your surroundings. For the next 15 minutes, Sophia extracted every detail Reynolds could provide, building a comprehensive understanding of Echo's position and the surrounding terrain. Meanwhile, satellite imagery and weather data continued to flow in from her support team. "This is impossible," muttered one of the junior officers assisting her. "Even with all this data, the variables are too complex for an accurate remote solution." Sophia ignored the comment, her mind fully engaged in the problem before her. This was what Ricardo had trained her for, not just following procedures, but solving the impossible problems when lives depended on it. The Tactical Operations Center door opened, and Sophia glanced up to see Anderson entering with several other officers. They'd obviously heard about the emergency and come to observe. Anderson's expression was a mixture of skepticism and curiosity. Sophia returned her attention to the calculations, refusing to be distracted by his presence. The lives at FOB Echo were what mattered now, not personal vindication. "Captain," one of the weather specialists called out, "we have new data showing an unexpected weather front moving through the Echo region. Wind patterns are shifting significantly." Sophia incorporated the new variables, adjusting her calculations with the fluidity that had made her father legendary. This wasn't just about mathematics anymore, it was about intuition, about understanding the invisible forces that would affect the shell's trajectory in ways no standard algorithm could predict. "How much longer?" Collins asked, entering the operations center. 10 minutes, sir," Sophia replied without looking up from her work. "I need to double-check these calculations before I'm confident in the solution." Anderson stepped forward. "Sir, with all due respect, this is an impossible task. Even if Captain Mendez is who she claims to be, calculating a remote firing solution with this many variables exceeds human capability. We should be exploring alternative support options." Sophia continued working, letting Anderson's doubt wash over her without penetration. She'd spent years doubting herself, measuring her abilities against her father's legend and finding herself wanting. But now, immersed in the pure challenge of the problem, those doubts fell away. This wasn't about being Ricardo Mendez's daughter anymore. This was about being Sophia Mendez, the most qualified person to solve this particular problem at this particular moment. "There," she said finally, pushing a completed set of calculations toward the communications officer. "Transmit these firing coordinates to Echo's artillery battery. Tell them to fire 3 rounds in sequence, 30 seconds apart." The officer hesitated, looking to Collins for confirmation. "Do it," Collins ordered. As the firing solution was transmitted, the operations center fell silent. Sophia sat perfectly still, her eyes closed, mentally tracing the trajectory the shells would follow, accounting for every variable, every subtle influence on their path. Minutes passed. The tension in the room grew palpable. "Captain Mendez." The communications officer called out suddenly, "Message from Major Reynolds." Sophia opened her eyes. "Put it on speaker." Reynolds' voice filled the room, thick with emotion despite his professional tone. "Camp Holloway, this is Echo. First round impact, perfect placement, northeast enemy force decimated. Second round, direct hit on southwest advance. Third round, completed the containment, enemy forces in full retreat." A pause. "Whatever angel you have calculating those shots, we owe them our lives. Echo out. The operations center erupted in cheers and applause. Officers who had been skeptical moments before looked at Sophia with newfound respect. Collins placed a hand on her shoulder, a gesture of quiet acknowledgement. Sophia felt a complex mixture of emotions: relief at the lives saved, satisfaction at the perfect execution, and something she hadn't expected: pride. Not in living up to her father's legacy, but in using the skills he'd taught her to make a difference when it truly mattered. She looked up to find Anderson staring at her, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met across the celebration, and for a moment, Sophia thought he might say something. Instead, he turned and walked out of the operations center without a word. Later that evening, Sophia sat alone in Collins' office, emotionally and mentally exhausted from the day's events. The door opened, and Matthews entered, carrying a small box. "Thought you might want this back," he said, placing the box on the desk. Inside was a set of captain's bars, her old rank insignia, preserved from when she'd left active duty. Sophia stared at the insignia, her feelings conflicted. "I don't know if I'm ready for this, sir." Matthews sat across from her. "No one's ordering you to return to active duty, Sophia. That's your choice. But after what I saw today, I'd be remiss if I didn't tell you that the Army needs officers with your abilities." "My father was a great man," Matthews interrupted gently, "but today wasn't about Ricardo Mendez. It was about Sophia Mendez saving 57 lives with a firing solution that no one else could have calculated." He leaned forward. "Your father cast a long shadow, yes. But today, you cast your own." Sophia ran her fingers over the captain's bars, feeling their weight, both physical and symbolic. "The question isn't whether you can live up to your father's legacy," Matthews continued. "It's whether you're willing to create your own." Before Sophia could respond, Collins entered, his expression serious. "We have a situation," he said without preamble. "Central Command has identified a high-value target in enemy artillery position that's been responsible for numerous Allied casualties. They need it eliminated, but it's in a location conventional approaches can't reach." "What kind of location?" Sophia asked, her professional interest automatically engaged. "Mountain ridge, heavily fortified, protected by geographic features that make traditional artillery targeting ineffective. Central Command has been trying to neutralize it for weeks without success." Collins met her eyes directly. "They're asking specifically for you, Captain Mendez. Apparently, word of your work today has already reached the highest levels." Sophia felt the familiar weight of expectation settling on her shoulders. Another impossible shot. Another test of her abilities. Another chance to be measured against her father's standard. But something was different now. The weight felt less crushing, more like a familiar load she was trained to carry. She thought of the soldiers at FOB Echo, alive because of her calculations. She thought of her father, who had taught her not just to make incredible shots, but to understand why those shots mattered. Sophia picked up the captain's bars from the box, feeling their familiar weight in her palm. "When do they need the solution?" she asked. Collins smiled slightly. "They've requested you personally oversee the operation. A helicopter will be here at 0600 to transport you to the forward command post." Sophia nodded, decision made. "I'll be ready, sir." As Collins and Matthews left her alone with her thoughts, Sophia reflected on the day's extraordinary turn of events. 12 hours ago, she had been Paperclip, the unremarkable logistics specialist hiding from her own capabilities. Now she was Captain Mendez again, facing a challenge that would push even her extraordinary skills to their limit. The journey ahead would be difficult. Reclaiming her identity meant facing the expectations, the pressure, the inevitable comparisons to her father. But for the first time since Ricardo's death, those comparisons didn't fill her with dread. Perhaps it was time to stop running from her father's shadow and start standing in her own light. The helicopter touched down at Forward Command Post Sierra at exactly 0742. its rotors kicking up swirls of dust that momentarily obscured the assembled officers waiting on the landing pad. Sophia stepped out, her posture military straight, captain's bars gleaming on her freshly issued uniform. The transition from civilian logistics specialist to artillery officer had happened with dizzying speed. A flurry of paperwork, hasty uniform fittings, and rushed briefings. General Harrison, the theater commander, stepped forward to greet her. Silver-haired with weathered features that spoke of decades in combat zones, he extended his hand with a brisk efficiency that matched his reputation. "Captain Mendez, your reputation precedes you." Sophia returned his handshake firmly. "Sir, I understand you have a difficult target." "Walk with me," Harrison said, leading her toward the command center. "What do you know about objective Redout?" "Only the basics." "From my briefing, sir. Enemy artillery position in the mountains, heavily fortified. Geographic protection that makes conventional targeting ineffective." Harrison nodded grimly. "That's the sanitized version. The reality is worse. Redout has been hitting our supply. Convoys for 3 months. 38 casualties, 17 dead. We've tried everything. Airstrikes, drone attacks, even a special forces infiltration. Nothing works. The position is nestled in a mountain fold that creates unpredictable wind patterns. Our targeting computers can't compensate accurately." Enough. Inside the command center, officers worked at various stations, their focused intensity conveying the operation's importance. Harrison led Sophia to a large topographical display in the center of the room. "This is Redout," he said, indicating a position nestled in a jagged mountain range. "And this is our problem." Sophia studied the display, immediately understanding the challenge. The enemy position was sheltered by a peculiar formation of ridges that created a natural fortress. More problematic were the atmospheric conditions. A confluence of altitude, temperature variations, and terrain-influenced wind patterns that would play havoc with ballistic calculations. It was audacious, unconventional, and depended on variables that couldn't be verified until the actual moment of firing. "Captain Anderson," Harrison said finally, "this would be your battery executing the fire mission. What's your assessment?" All eyes turned to Anderson. Sophia held her breath, half expecting him to reject her plan or raise doubts about its feasibility. "The approach is unorthodox," Anderson said carefully, "but tactically sound. If Captain Mendez's atmospheric analysis is correct, this represents our best opportunity to neutralize Redout." Sophia couldn't hide her surprise at his endorsement. Anderson met her gaze across the table, giving her a slight nod. Professional respect, however reluctant. "Very well," Harrison decided. "We proceed with Captain Mendez's plan. Captain Anderson, prepare your battery for movement to the northern ridge position. The fire mission will commence at precisely 0427 hours to coincide with the projected stability window." As the briefing concluded and officers dispersed to their various responsibilities, Anderson approached Sophia. "Your calculations are impressive," he said, his tone formal, but without the hostility that had characterized their previous interactions. "But executing this fire mission will require precision beyond standard parameters. My gun crews are good, but this will push them to their limits. I'd like to brief them personally," Sophia suggested. "Help them understand exactly what we're attempting." Anderson considered this for a moment before nodding. "That would be helpful. We move out in 2 hours. Be ready." The journey to the northern ridge position was tense and silent. Sophia rode in the lead vehicle with Anderson and his executive officer, Lieutenant Hayes. The convoy of artillery pieces and support vehicles wound through narrow mountain roads, maintaining strict communications discipline to avoid detection. As they approached the firing position, Sophia studied the terrain through night vision binoculars. The position offered a clear line of sight to the target area, though the distance and intervening ridgelines would make conventional targeting impossible. This was exactly the kind of shot her father had specialized in. The impossible trajectory, the perfect calculation that defied standard doctrine. "We're here," Anderson announced as the convoy reached the designated position. "We have 2 hours to emplace and prepare before the stability window opens." The artillery crews moved with practiced efficiency, positioning the M777 howitzers and establishing the fire direction center. Sophia watched with professional appreciation. Whatever else might be said about Anderson, he ran a disciplined battery. "Your crew briefing," Anderson reminded her as the setup neared completion. "Now's the time." Sophia gathered with the gun. Crews and fire direction specialists, their faces illuminated by the dim red lighting used to preserve night vision. She could see the mixture of curiosity and skepticism in their expressions. They'd obviously heard about her connection to the legendary Thunderbolt Mendez, about her extraordinary calculations that had saved FOB Echo. "The mission we're attempting tonight isn't in any field manual," she began. "We're going to fire an arc trajectory over this ridge system, with multiple crosswind interactions, to hit a target that's been untouchable by conventional approaches." She explained the wind stability window, the precise calculations required, and the timing that would be critical to success. "This isn't just about mathematics," she told them. "It's about instinct, about feeling the subtle changes in the air that tell you when to make macro adjustments. My father used to say that great artillery isn't just science, it's art." She could see recognition in some of their faces, soldiers who had heard Ricardo Mendez say those exact words during training seminars or field exercises. "Tonight, we're going to create something that hasn't been done before," Sophia continued. "A fire mission that will be studied in artillery schools for years to come. But more importantly, we're going to eliminate a threat that has already taken 17 American lives." The skepticism in their expressions had transformed to something else now: determination, focus, a shared sense of purpose. These were professional soldiers who understood exactly what was at stake. Captain Mendez, one of the senior sergeants, spoke up. "Your father once told my training class that impossible shots only seem impossible until someone proves otherwise. Looks like it runs in the family." Sophia felt a complex surge of emotions at the reference to Ricardo: pride, grief, and something new. Acceptance of the legacy she had tried to escape, but that had ultimately led her back to this moment, to this mission, to this opportunity to make a difference. "Thank you, Sergeant," she said simply. "Let's prove it together." As the crews returned to their final preparations, Anderson approached her. "Good briefing," he acknowledged. "They're motivated. They're professionals," Sophia replied. "They understand what we're attempting." Anderson hesitated, seeming to struggle with something he wanted to say. "Listen, Mendez, about Camp Holloway, my behavior was unprofessional. I let my own insecurities cloud my judgment." The unexpected apology caught Sophia off guard. "Insecurities?" "When I realized who you were, Ricardo Mendez's daughter, it triggered something. I'd spent my career trying to live up to standards set by officers like your father. Finding you hiding in a logistics role, deliberately concealing abilities that the rest of us work years to develop." He shook his head. It felt like an insult somehow. Sophia considered his words carefully. "I wasn't hiding because I thought the work was beneath me. I was hiding because every time I calculated a firing solution, all anyone saw was my father's daughter. Not my own abilities, not my own accomplishments, just Ricardo Mendez's legacy continuing through me." "I understand that better now," Anderson admitted. "Though it took seeing you work, seeing your unique approach to problems, to recognize that you're not just your father's echo. You're something entirely your own." Before Sophia could respond, Lieutenant Hayes approached urgently. "Captains, meteorological update. The wind patterns are shifting earlier than predicted. The stability window may open sooner than we calculated." Sophia checked her father's watch. a habit so ingrained she barely noticed it anymore. How? Much sooner? Based on current measurements, approximately 22 minutes earlier than projected. Sophia and Anderson exchanged glances, both understanding the implications. The carefully timed operation would need to adjust. Recalculate the firing sequence, Anderson ordered Hayes. Inform all gun crews of the updated timeline. As Hayes hurried to relay the orders, Anderson turned back to Sophia. This changes your ballistic calculations. Can you adjust in time? Sophia was already mentally recalculating, factoring in the earlier stability window and what it might mean for their trajectory. Yes, but I'll need to verify with the most current atmospheric data. The fire direction center is yours, Anderson said, gesturing toward the command vehicle where the targeting systems were housed. Whatever you need. For the next 15 minutes, Sophia worked intensely, updating her calculations based on the shift in meteorological data. The stability window was indeed opening earlier, but its characteristics were slightly different than her original projections. The winds would be marginally stronger, requiring additional compensation in the firing solution. Anderson watched her work, occasionally asking pointed questions that revealed his own considerable expertise. Despite their history, they were finding a rhythm now. Two artillery professionals focused on a complex problem, personal differences set aside for the mission at hand. Final calculation complete, Sophia announced, handing Anderson the updated firing solution. Elevation 52, 4 degrees, azimuth 127. 8. Charge 6. We'll need to fire precisely 7 minutes and 30 seconds into the stability window for optimal results. Anderson reviewed her calculations, nodding slowly. This is far beyond standard parameters. The computer is flagging it as exceeding safety protocols. The computer doesn't understand what we're attempting, Sophia replied. This is why I'm here. Anderson met her gaze, seeming to come to a decision. Yes, it is. He turned to Hayes. Override the computer safety protocols. Input Captain Mendez's solution manually. Prepare to fire on her command. Hayes looked momentarily surprised but recovered quickly. Yes, sir. Manual override engaged. As the crews made final preparations, Sophia stepped outside the command vehicle, needing a moment to center herself before the critical moment arrived. The night air was cool and crisp, the stars brilliant in the mountain sky. She could feel the subtle shifts in the wind, precursors to the stability window she had identified in the meteorological data. Anderson joined her, his expression solemn in the dim light. 5 minutes to stability window, he said quietly. Sophia nodded, checking her father's watch again. We'll only get one shot at this. One perfect shot, Anderson agreed. Your father would say that's all you ever need. Sophia smiled slightly. He did say that, often. They stood in companionable silence for a moment, two artillery officers united by the challenge before them, despite their complicated history. Time to make history, Captain Mendez, Anderson said finally. After you. Inside the command vehicle, the atmosphere was tense with focused anticipation. The stability window had opened, the countdown to their optimal firing moment had begun, and every member of the battery was acutely aware of the mission's importance. 2 minutes to firing point, Hayes announced. Sophia watched the meteorological readings, confirming that conditions matched her predictions. The subtle stabilization of the crosswinds was happening exactly as she had calculated, a brief, perfect moment when the chaotic mountain atmosphere would allow a precisely calculated shell to thread an impossible path to its target. 1 minute. She thought of her father, of the lessons he had taught her, of the legacy she had tried to escape, but that had ultimately prepared her for this moment. Ricardo had always told her that artillery was about more than destruction. It was about protection, about preventing greater loss of life, about creating the conditions for peace. Tonight, she would honor that philosophy. 30 seconds. Sophia took a deep breath, centering herself completely in the moment. All the doubts, all the pressure of her father's legacy, all the months of hiding her abilities, none of that mattered now. Only the mission, only the calculation, only the perfect shot that would save lives by ending a threat. 10 seconds. She met Anderson's eyes across the command vehicle. He gave her a small nod, respect from one professional to another. Acknowledgement that this was her moment, her shot, her opportunity to prove what she was capable of. 5 seconds, mark. Fire, Sophia commanded, her voice clear and confident. The night erupted with the controlled thunder of the M777 howitzer. The shell screamed into the darkness, following the impossibly complex trajectory Sophia had calculated, arcing high over mountain ridges, cutting through the briefly stabilized crosswinds, descending at a precise angle toward a target that had eluded every previous attempt to neutralize it. For several long moments, there was silence in the command vehicle. Then the radio crackled to life. "Observer reports direct hit," Hayes announced, unable to keep the awe from his voice. "Redout is neutralized. Confirmed destruction of all artillery pieces and ammunition storage. Secondary explosions ongoing." A cheer erupted from the crews outside. Inside the command vehicle, Anderson simply stared at Sophia, a new respect evident in his expression. "That," he said quietly, "was the most extraordinary artillery calculation I have ever witnessed." Sophia felt a complex surge of emotions. Relief, satisfaction, pride not in living up to her father's legacy, but in proving her own capabilities when it truly mattered. "Not bad for a logistics specialist," she replied with a small smile. "I think we're well past that pretense, Captain Mendez," Anderson said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on an impossible shot perfectly executed." As Sophia shook his hand, accepting the professional respect she had earned, she realized something important had shifted within her. The weight of her father's legacy hadn't disappeared, it never would, but it no longer felt like a burden. Instead, it felt like a foundation upon which she could build something uniquely her own. 3 months after Operation Redout, Sophia found herself standing before a classroom of artillery officers at Fort Sill's Advanced Artillery School. The same classroom where her father had once taught, where he had shaped a generation of artillery officers with his revolutionary approach to ballistic calculation and fire mission planning. "Precision artillery isn't just about hitting a target," she told the attentive students. "It's about understanding that every shell represents both destructive potential and protective capability. The difference lies in your calculations, your judgment, and your purpose." The classroom was packed beyond capacity. Word had spread quickly through the artillery community about Captain Sophia Mendez, the officer who had calculated the impossible arc, as the Redout shot had come to be known. A trajectory that defied conventional ballistics, that had been flagged as impossible by targeting computers, but that had struck with perfect precision when guided by human intuition and extraordinary skill. The Redout operation succeeded. "Not because of advanced technology," Sophia continued, "but because of a fundamental principle my father taught me. Machines calculate based on what they know, but humans can intuit what might be possible." She moved to the tactical display, bringing up the mountain terrain where Operation Redout had taken place. The students leaned forward, eager to learn the details of a shot that was already becoming legendary in artillery circles. "Standard doctrine would have approached from these vectors," Sophia explained, highlighting the Western approaches. "But by analyzing historical meteorological data, we identified a recurring atmospheric pattern that created a brief stability window in the chaotic mountain winds." As she walked the officers through her process, the data analysis, the pattern recognition, the unconventional trajectory calculation, Sophia felt a sense of purpose that had eluded her during her years in hiding. This wasn't about living up to her father's legacy anymore. It was about building on it, extending it, making it her own. After the lecture, Colonel Matthews waited for her outside the classroom. Though still officially assigned to Camp Holloway, Sophia had spent the past 3 months on a special assignment, working with Central Command to develop new artillery doctrine based on the principles she had applied during Operation Redout. "Impressive lecture," Matthews said as they walked toward the officers' mess. "You had them hanging on every word." "They're good officers," Sophia replied. "Eager to learn, to push beyond conventional limitations." "Speaking of pushing beyond limitations," Matthews said, "I have news. General Harrison has approved your proposal for the Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit. You'll have authorization to recruit a team of specialists to develop new methodologies for complex artillery operations." Sophia stopped walking. "They approved it? The entire proposal?" Matthews nodded, smiling at her surprise. "Every word. And they've assigned you as the commanding officer, with full authority to select your team members." It was more than Sophia had dared hope for. The Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit had been her vision, a specialized team dedicated to solving the most complex artillery challenges, developing new calculation methodologies, and training the next generation of artillery officers to think beyond the limitations of standard doctrine. "There's more," Matthews continued as they resumed walking. "The first operational deployment of your unit has already been scheduled. The situation in the eastern mountain region has deteriorated. 3 forward bases are under threat from enemy artillery positioned in terrain similar to Redout. Central Command wants your team to develop solutions. When do we deploy?" 2 weeks. Just enough time to assemble your team and prepare." Matthews glanced at her. "Any thoughts on who you want to recruit?" Sophia had been considering this question ever since submitting her proposal. "I need the best calculators in the corps, officers who understand that artillery is both science and art, and I need at least one person who will challenge my thinking, who won't simply defer to my reputation." Matthews raised an eyebrow. "Someone like Captain Anderson, perhaps." Sophia hadn't expected that name. "Anderson? We've barely spoken since Redout. He's been doing interesting work. After your operation, he reorganized his battery's training protocols to emphasize adaptive calculation rather than reliance on targeting computers. His units are scoring the highest accuracy ratings in the regiment." Sophia considered this information. Her relationship with Anderson had transformed during Operation Redout, from antagonism to reluctant respect to professional admiration. Still, the idea of working directly with him on her new team was unexpected. "I'll consider it," she said finally. "But my team needs to be built on merit, not on personal history or connections." Matthews nodded approvingly. "I would expect nothing less from Ricardo Mendez's daughter." Once, that phrase would have made Sophia bristle, the reduction of her identity to her father's legacy. Now she accepted it as one aspect of who she was, important but not defining. "From Sophia Mendez," she corrected gently. "Ricardo taught me the foundations, but the Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit will be building something new." That evening, Sophia sat in her temporary quarters, reviewing personnel files of potential team members for her new unit. The responsibility of selection weighed heavily. These officers would form the core of a team tasked with developing revolutionary artillery methodologies. Their skills, personalities, and perspectives would shape the unit's success or failure. She had identified several promising candidates. Lieutenant Rivera, whose graduate thesis on high-angle fire in complex terrain had challenged conventional doctrine. Sergeant Major Patel, whose 20 years of practical experience made her an unparalleled judge of real-world ballistic variables. Captain Chun, whose background in meteorology and ballistics made him uniquely suited for the kind of atmospheric analysis the unit would need. And then there was Anderson's file, set aside, but not dismissed. Sophia opened it, studying his record with fresh eyes. His antagonism at Camp Holloway seemed like a lifetime ago, rendered insignificant by the crucible of Operation Redout. What remained was a record of solid competence, innovative thinking, and most importantly, a willingness to challenge established doctrine when the situation demanded it. A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. "Enter," she called, expecting the adjutant with the evening's communications updates. Instead, Captain James Anderson stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "Captain Mendez," he said formally, "may I speak with you?" Sophia gestured to the chair across from her desk, setting aside the personnel files. "Of course. What brings you to Fort Sill?" "I've been reassigned here temporarily, teaching a course on adaptive fire mission planning." Anderson sat, his posture military straight. "But that's not why I'm here. I've heard about your new command." "News travels fast," Sophia observed. "In artillery circles, your name tends to accelerate communication." A small smile briefly softened his features. "The Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit is exactly what the Corps needs, especially with the situations developing in the Eastern Mountains." Sophia studied him, curious about his purpose. "Thank you. We're still in the formative stages." Anderson took a deep breath, seeming to steel himself. "I'd like to be considered for your team." Of all the things Sophia had expected him to say, this was perhaps the least anticipated. "You want to serve under my command?" "I want to be part of what you're building," Anderson corrected. "After Redout, I've been rethinking everything I thought I knew about artillery calculation. The work you're doing, it's going to change doctrine for decades to come. I want to contribute to that." Sophia considered him carefully. The man sitting before her was markedly different from the antagonistic officer who had engineered her exposure at Camp Holloway. Operation Redout had changed him, just as it had changed her. "It won't be easy," she said finally. "Will be challenging. Conventional wisdom, pushing boundaries that many officers consider sacrosanct. And we'll be doing it under intense scrutiny, with lives depending on our results." "I understand that," Anderson replied. "That's precisely why I want to be involved." "Why should I select you?" Sophia asked directly. "After our history at Camp Holloway, why would you want to serve under my command, and why would I want you on my team?" Anderson met her gaze unflinchingly. "Because I was wrong about you, and I was wrong about artillery. I believed that following established doctrine was the path to excellence. Redout proved otherwise. As for why you should select me," he paused, "because I'll question you. I'll challenge your assumptions. I won't be overawed by your reputation or your abilities. You need someone who will push back when necessary, who will force you to defend your innovations with solid reasoning." Sophia couldn't help but smile slightly. "You're essentially arguing that your former antagonism is now an asset." "In a manner of speaking, yes." Anderson returned her smile cautiously. "Though I prefer to think of it as intellectual independence rather than antagonism." Sophia considered the proposition. There was truth in Anderson's assessment. A team composed entirely of officers who deferred to her judgment might be harmonious, but it wouldn't produce the rigorous debate needed to develop truly revolutionary methodologies. "I'll consider your application," she said finally, "along with all others, on its merits." Anderson nodded, accepting this as fair. "That's all I ask." He stood to leave, then hesitated. "For what it's worth, I'm sorry for how I behaved at Camp Holloway. My insecurity about my own abilities led me to target someone who represented excellence I hadn't achieved. It was unprofessional and unworthy." The sincere apology caught Sophia off guard. "Apology accepted, Captain. Redout changed many things, our professional relationship included." After Anderson left, Sophia returned to the personnel files with a new perspective. Building her team wasn't just about selecting the most technically proficient officers. It was about creating a unit with the right balance of skills, perspectives, and personalities to tackle the unprecedented challenges they would face. Weeks later, the newly formed Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit deployed to Forward Operating Base Archer in the Eastern Mountains. The 6-person team Sophia had selected represented the best combination of technical skill, practical experience, and intellectual diversity she could assemble. Rivera with his theoretical expertise, Patel with her practical wisdom, Chen with his meteorological background, Lieutenant Wong with her computer modeling skills, Sergeant Thompson with his field experience, and Anderson, the intellectual challenger she had decided the team needed. Their mission was critical and urgent. 3 American forward bases, Nomad, Sentinel, and Outpost, were under increasing threat from enemy artillery positions in the surrounding mountains. Like Redout, these positions exploited terrain features that made conventional targeting nearly impossible. Unlike Redout, there were multiple positions requiring simultaneous neutralization to protect the endangered bases. "We're facing a more complex challenge than Redout," Sophia explained during their first operational briefing at FOB Echo. "These enemy positions have been established specifically to counter our standard artillery doctrine. They've studied our limitations and positioned accordingly." She displayed the tactical map showing the 3 American bases and the surrounding enemy artillery positions. "The terrain creates unpredictable wind patterns similar to what we encountered at Redout, but with greater variability. Standard targeting systems are reporting accuracy probabilities below 30% for all approaches, which means conventional solutions are effectively useless," Anderson observed, studying the map intently. "They've created a situation where our technical advantages are neutralized by environmental factors." "Exactly," Sophia confirmed. "We need to develop unconventional solutions, not just one, as we did for Redout, but coordinated approaches for multiple targets." "A symphony rather than a solo," Rivera suggested. Sophia nodded approvingly. "Precisely. Each target requires its own unique solution, but those solutions must be executed in harmony to achieve the desired effect." For the next 3 days, the unit worked intensely, analyzing meteorological data, studying terrain features, and developing potential firing solutions. Sophia drove them hard, knowing that lives depended on their success, but also created an environment where every team member felt empowered to contribute ideas, challenge assumptions, and push beyond conventional limitations. On the morning of the 4th day, Anderson approached Sophia as she reviewed the latest meteorological reports. "I've been studying the data for Target Echo 3, he said, referring to one of the most problematic enemy positions. "There's something interesting in the wind patterns." Sophia looked up from her work. "What have you found?" "It's not just a pattern, it's a counter-pattern." Anderson displayed his analysis on the tactical screen. "When the winds shift here, creating this chaotic zone that prevents accurate targeting, they simultaneously create a stability corridor here." He highlighted a narrow approach vector that hadn't been considered in previous analyses. Sophia studied the data, immediately grasping the implications. A backdoor approach. While conventional wisdom would avoid firing during these wind shifts, we could exploit them by using this narrow corridor, Anderson finished. "It's counterintuitive, which is probably why it hasn't been identified before." Sophia felt a surge of professional excitement. This was exactly the kind of innovative thinking she had hoped to foster in the unit, the willingness to look beyond established doctrine, to see possibilities where others saw only obstacles. "Excellent work, Captain," she said with genuine appreciation. "Let's see if we can identify similar opportunities for the other targets." Anderson's discovery catalyzed a new approach. Rather than fighting against the chaotic wind patterns, the team began looking for ways to exploit them, identifying brief, unconventional firing corridors that emerged precisely when standard doctrine would consider conditions least favorable. By the end of the week, They had developed complete firing solutions for all enemy positions, solutions that utilized atmospheric conditions in ways that defied conventional artillery wisdom, but that mathematical modeling suggested would achieve unprecedented accuracy. The moment of truth came on a clear, cold morning when the first phase of coordinated fire missions was scheduled to commence. Sophia and her team had established a tactical operations center at FOB Echo, where they would monitor conditions and adjust firing solutions as needed. "All artillery batteries report ready," Anderson announced as the final preparations were completed. "Weather conditions are matching our projections." Sophia surveyed the tactical display, where real-time meteorological data confirmed that the unusual atmospheric conditions they planned to exploit were developing as predicted. "Proceed with Phase 1, she ordered. "Batteries will fire on my mark." The coordinated fire mission was unlike anything previously attempted in modern artillery doctrine. 3 separate batteries, firing at precisely calculated intervals, exploiting momentary stability corridors and chaotic wind patterns to strike targets that conventional wisdom deemed untouchable. "Mark," Sophia commanded. Across the region, artillery pieces thundered in carefully orchestrated sequence. Shells arced through impossible trajectories, threading narrow atmospheric corridors to strike targets with precision that defied standard ballistic calculations. Sophia followed his gaze, taking in the cadets clustering around members of her unit, the senior officers discussing the implications of their new methodologies, the entire artillery community energized by the possibilities they had revealed. It wasn't about escaping his shadow, she realized aloud. It was about finding my own light, different from his but illuminating the same field, the same principles, the same commitment to excellence. As the reception continued around her, Sophia thought about the journey that had brought her here, from the quiet logistics specialist at Camp Holloway to the commander of the most innovative artillery unit in the modern military. The path had been neither straight nor easy, but it had led her to exactly where she needed to be. They had called her too fragile for artillery until she fired the shot that ended the war, but fragility had never been her problem. Her challenge had been finding the courage to embrace her full potential, to step out of anonymity and into the light of her own capabilities. Not as Ricardo Mendez's daughter, but as Sophia Mendez, artillery officer, innovator, and pioneer in her own right. The war had ended, but her contribution to artillery's evolution was just beginning. And unlike the shells she directed with such precision, the impact of that contribution would continue to spread, shaping the future of artillery for generations to come. 2 years after the Eastern Mountains operation, Sophia Mendez stood at the edge of a ceremonial stage in Washington, D.C., watching as President Reynolds pinned the Distinguished Service Medal on her dress uniform. At 31, she had become the youngest artillery officer to receive the nation's highest non-combat military decoration, recognized for innovations that had revolutionized modern artillery doctrine and saved countless lives. Captain Mendez's contributions extend beyond tactical success, the President announced to the assembled dignitaries. Her advanced ballistic calculation methodologies have fundamentally transformed how we think about precision fires, creating possibilities where limitations once existed. Sophia maintained her composure through the ceremony, but her mind traveled back to that moment at Camp Holloway when she had corrected Anderson's firing calculations, shattering her carefully constructed anonymity. The journey from logistics specialist to decorated artillery innovator had been extraordinary, yet somehow it felt like the path she had been destined to follow all along. After the ceremony, General Harrison approached, his expression uncommonly warm. "Congratulations, Captain. Or should I say Major? Your promotion paperwork cleared this morning." Sophia felt a surge of pride mixed with humility. "Thank you, sir. I'm honored. You've earned it," Harrison replied. "Though I suspect this is just the beginning. I've been authorized to inform you that the Joint Chiefs have approved the expansion of your program." The Advanced Ballistic Calculation Unit is being upgraded to full battalion status with increased funding and personnel. The news took Sophia by surprise. Her small experimental unit transformed into a battalion, a formal acknowledgement that her methodologies had moved beyond innovation to become established doctrine. "There's more," Harrison continued. "They want you to command it, of course. Full lieutenant colonel rank, effective immediately upon your acceptance. Lieutenant colonel, at 31. The promotion would place her among the youngest officers of that rank in Army history. The responsibility was enormous, not just leading a specialized team, but commanding a full battalion dedicated to advancing artillery science." "This is unexpected, sir," Sophia managed, genuinely stunned by the accelerated promotion. Harrison smiled slightly. "Is it? Your father made lieutenant colonel at 33. You're ahead of his pace." Once, the comparison to Ricardo would have filled Sophia with anxiety, the pressure of measuring up to his legendary status. Now it felt like a natural connection between two artillery innovators who happened to share a bloodline. "When do I need to decide?" she asked. "They'd like your answer by the end of the week," Harrison replied. "Though I can't imagine you'd decline." Sophia nodded thoughtfully. "I'll need to consider the implications for my team. The transition from experimental unit to formal battalion will change our operational dynamics." Harrison studied her for a moment. "That's exactly why they want you in command. Most officers would be focused solely on the prestige of the promotion. You're thinking about the mission, about your people." He clapped her shoulder lightly. "Ricardo taught you well." Later that evening, Sophia sat alone in her hotel room, staring at the Distinguished Service Medal resting on the desk. Lieutenant Colonel Mendez, commander of the Advanced Ballistic Calculation Battalion. It was more than she had ever imagined possible when she'd been hiding in the logistics department at Camp Holloway, deliberately suppressing her abilities to escape her father's shadow. Her phone buzzed with a message from Anderson. "Congratulations, Major. Or should I already be practicing, Colonel? The team is celebrating your medal at the hotel bar. Your presence is requested, though I'm sure you have more distinguished company available." Sophia smiled at the message. Anderson had become a valued colleague and, somewhat unexpectedly, a friend. His willingness to challenge her thinking had proven invaluable as they developed the new artillery methodologies. She texted back, "On my way. And I can't think of more distinguished company than the team that made this possible." At the hotel bar, Sophia found her core team gathered around a reserved table: Anderson, Rivera, Patel, Chun, Wong, and Thompson. They rose as she approached, their expressions a mixture of pride, respect, and genuine affection. "Speech," called Rivera as Sophia joined them. Sophia shook her head, smiling. "No speeches tonight. Tonight, we're just colleagues celebrating a shared achievement." "Not just colleagues," Patel corrected, raising her glass. "A team. The finest artillery minds in the service, brought together by a leader who saw possibilities where others saw only limitations." The others raised their glasses in agreement. Sophia felt a warm sense of belonging that had eluded her for much of her career. This wasn't about being Ricardo Mendez's daughter anymore. This was about the unit they had built together, the innovations they had pioneered, the new path they had forged for artillery's evolution. As the evening progressed, Sophia found herself in conversation with Anderson at the edge of the group. "Harrison told me about the battalion command," he said quietly. "Congratulations again. It's well-deserved." "I haven't accepted yet," Sophia replied. Anderson looked surprised. "Why not?" "It's an extraordinary opportunity. The chance to institutionalize everything we've been developing." "That's precisely what concerns me," Sophia admitted. "Our success has come from our flexibility, our willingness to challenge conventional thinking. Formal battalion structure brings bureaucracy, established procedures, potential resistance to innovation." Anderson considered this thoughtfully. "True, But it also brings resources, influence, and the ability to implement changes across the entire artillery branch. He studied her for a moment. You're not just worried about bureaucracy, are you? What's really holding you back? Sophia sighed, appreciating his perceptiveness. When I was hiding at Camp Holloway, I was running from expectations, from the pressure of being Ricardo Mendez's daughter. Now I find myself running toward a position that will only increase those expectations. That will place me directly in comparison with him at every turn. You've already surpassed those expectations, Anderson pointed out. Your innovations at Redout and in the Eastern Mountains have established you as an artillery theorist in your own right. No one's comparing you to your father anymore. They're studying your methodologies on their merits. For the next 2 hours, the interdiction pattern continued according to the calculated schedule. Sophia monitored the effects closely, making minor adjustments as atmospheric conditions evolved. It was artillery as she had always envisioned it, not just a blunt instrument of destruction, but a precision tool capable of shaping the battlefield in subtle, sophisticated ways. Enemy launch detected, reported the sensor officer suddenly. Multiple projectiles, approaching from bearing 047. Sophia felt a surge of tension. This was the moment of truth, the test of whether Operation Firebreak would perform as theorized or fail in its first real-world application. Maintain interdiction pattern, she ordered calmly. Adjust Sector 3 timing to compensate for the approaching munitions. The operations center fell silent as everyone watched the tracking display, following the enemy projectiles as they approached the invisible barrier created by the interdiction fires. Projectiles entering the interdiction zone, the sensor officer announced. Tracking shows guidance anomalies. They're losing lock. Trajectories destabilizing. Sophia watched intently as the incoming munitions began to deviate from their programmed courses, their sophisticated guidance systems confused by the precisely calculated atmospheric disturbances created by her artillery pattern. All enemy projectiles have missed their targets, reported the sensor officer finally. Nearest impact was over 800 meters from any base installation. A wave of controlled celebration moved through the operations center, professional soldiers acknowledging success while maintaining focus on the ongoing mission. They'll adjust, Sophia cautioned, tempering the moment of victory. This was their first encounter with our interdiction field. They'll analyze what happened and modify their approach. And we'll be ready when they do, Anderson responded. Confidently, the beauty of this system is its adaptability. We're not relying on fixed defensive positions or predetermined response patterns. We're creating dynamic conditions that can evolve as the threat evolves. Over the next 3 days, the enemy made 7 more attempts to penetrate the defenses of FOB Horizon. Each time, they modified their approach, changing launch positions, adjusting guidance parameters, altering trajectory profiles. And each time, Sophia's team adapted the interdiction pattern to counter these changes, maintaining the protective barrier that rendered their advanced guidance systems ineffective. On the 4th day, enemy launch attempts ceased entirely. Reconnaissance confirmed they had withdrawn their advanced artillery systems from the region, unable to overcome the innovative defense Sophia and her team had created. General Harrison arrived at FOB Horizon the following morning, his expression betraying both satisfaction and amazement as Sophia briefed him on Operation Firebreak. "You've done more than neutralize a specific threat, Colonel," he said when she had finished. "You've fundamentally changed how we think about artillery's role in modern warfare. This isn't just counter-battery fire or even precision destruction. It's active defense through environmental manipulation. It's revolutionary." Sophia accepted the praise professionally, but her greatest satisfaction came from what Harrison said next. "The enemy has withdrawn all of their advanced artillery systems from the theater of operations. Intelligence indicates they've determined the systems are ineffective against our new defensive capabilities. In essence, Colonel, you've ended the artillery war before it could truly begin. Later, as Sophia stood on the observation platform overlooking FOB horizon, Anderson joined her, offering a cup of coffee. "They're already calling it the Mendez doctrine back at Central Command," he informed her. "Predictive interdiction through precision fires. Your father revolutionized offensive artillery. You've revolutionized defensive application." Sophia took the coffee gratefully. "It wasn't just me. It was the team we built, the foundation of innovation we established together." Anderson nodded in acknowledgement. "True, but it took your vision to see beyond conventional applications, to recognize that artillery could be more than just a destructive force." They stood in companionable silence for a moment, looking out over the base that their innovation had protected, the region that would remain stable because of what they had accomplished. "Your father would be proud," Anderson said finally. "Not because you followed in his footsteps, but because you forged your own path. You didn't just live up to his legacy, you extended it in directions he never imagined." Sophia smiled, feeling a deep sense of peace with her father's memory, with her own journey from hiding her abilities to embracing her full potential. "He used to tell me that artillery was about more than destruction. It was about precision, about responsibility, about using power to protect as well as to destroy." He was right, Anderson agreed. "And so were you, when you saw possibilities that the rest of us missed." As the sun set over FOB horizon, Sophia reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her here, from the ghost-like logistics specialist at Camp Holloway to the innovative commander who had ended an artillery war through unprecedented application of precision fires. They had called her too fragile for artillery until she fired the shot that ended the war. But what they had failed to understand was that true strength lay not in destructive power but in the precision, intelligence, and vision to use that power in transformative ways. The Mendez legacy continued, not as a burden to be escaped but as a foundation to be built upon, a legacy of innovation, of seeing beyond limitations, of understanding that artillery's greatest potential lay not in how much it could destroy, but in how precisely it could be applied to shape the conditions for peace. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.